Hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Manager of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this second conversation in our Political Posters series, featuring artists Kay Rosen and J Garcia, moderated by Shira Backer. This talk is held in conjunction with We Fight to Build a Free World, an exhibition by Jonathan Horowitz. Now I would like to briefly introduce our speakers, beginning with moderator Shira Backer. Backer is the Levy Assistant Curator at the Jewish Museum, where she's worked on exhibitions including We Fight to Build a Free World, an exhibition by Jonathan Horowitz, Martha Rossler, Irrespective, and Masterpieces and Curiosities, Elaine Lustig-Cohen. She was formerly Assistant Curator at the American Federation of Arts. Kay Rosen's investigation into the visual possibilities of language has been her primary focus for over 4 decades. Among the honors she has been awarded are a Guggenheim Fellowship and 3 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships. She taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for 24 years. Her work can be seen through May 2021 in the exhibition Energy in All Directions at the Tang Teaching Museum and Art Gallery at Skidmore College, and in upcoming shows at Sycamore Jenkins in New York, Krakow Witkin Gallery in Boston, and a 2021 site-specific installation in Washington, D.C. J Garcia blends history, contemporary themes, and a graphic style to create politically charged art that reaches beyond aesthetics. Using sculpture, installation, murals, printmaking, and his controversial political cartoons, he aims to challenge his viewers to question sources of power and the whitewashing of history. After receiving his BFA with a minor in Chicano Studies from the University of New Mexico, Garcia went on to complete his MFA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. His work can be found in the collections of the National Museum of Mexican Art, the National Hispanic Cultural Center, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Now it is my pleasure to invite Shira to begin the conversation.
Hi, welcome, and thanks so much, Kay and Eric, for being a part of this discussion. It's been such a thrill to have your work in the show and to have you included in this really kind of dynamic and interesting group of artists. As we were discussing kind of in preparation for this call, I think Jonathan and I had this fantasy of bringing these 36 people together for the exhibition opening, at least as many of you as could come. And I know that both of you had planned to be in New York for it. So it's nice to get like at least a little taste of that because the pandemic obviously made it impossible to open the show and then when it did open to physically gather people to celebrate it. So it's really nice that we're here virtually at least. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about kind of the poster commissions and what role they play in this exhibition, We Fight to Build a Free World, an exhibition by Jonathan Horowitz. The project is one that Jonathan was invited to do with the museum in 2017 after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. And a lot of us at the museum were thinking about the rise of anti-Semitism, but more broadly, kind of a rising tide of bigotry and intolerance and racism in this country, and kind of how we as an institution could really bring those reflections into the public space that we have and use our platform. So Jonathan got quite an open-ended brief to do this exhibition and really started thinking very broadly about what this represented. And one of the things that was always core to his conception of what the show was including kind of a broad constituency of contemporary artists to somehow represent how not only he, but also some of his colleagues or some of his peers were thinking about the politics of our time. And so this is a wall of posters that you see. Again, there are 36 artists represented here, Kay and Eric among them. And I'll point out Kay's poster is the top row, almost all the way to the right. What would that be? One from the left. And Eric's poster, you'll see actually just next to it at the left. I didn't even realize that you're next to each other on the wall. This is so appropriate. So this is the full wall, and these are works that Jonathan reached out to 36 different artists and asked them to create a political poster engaging with an issue of their choosing. It was completely open-ended, and the responses really reflect kind of a wonderful kind of range of different concerns, everything from school segregation to the use of prison labor to fight fires in California. And Kay and Eric both contributed original designs for this project. And the point of inspiration particularly was this small painting by Ben Shahn, which we have on view in the show. So the title of the exhibition is actually drawn from this work, We Fight for a Free World. The title of the show is We Fight to Build a Free World. And this is something that Shahn made when he was working for the Office of War Information during World War II. And the idea was there was this series of posters, various artists who worked for the office were contributing. And in this design, Shahn actually kind of pulled their designs together to create this new image. And the artists that he chose actually are quite interesting. So just to kind of tell you what you're looking at, to the left is an artist called Edward Millman. Then next is Keita Kollwitz. In the middle is an image by Shahn himself, that's Slavery. Yasuo Koniyoshi made the image for Torture. And then all the way to the right is Bernard Perlin with Murder. And so the idea was that this would be a series of propaganda posters, of political posters that would be kind of mass produced by the Office of War Information and kind of disseminated in various ways. And then this poster that Shahn created was kind of an additional design that would incorporate these various components. In fact, most of these were never produced, and Shahn's poster that you see kind of sketched out in this painting was also never produced. And I think the reasons for that we could speculate about, but you know, there's some really interesting things that go on in the work, I think, that made it a really apt choice for the show. So of course, there's the idea of one artist using their platform, in this case, this kind of commission or this role at the Office of War Information to offer a platform for other artists. So it's kind of giving you this visual representation of a kind of collectivity. And also, I think the artists that he chose to feature really say something about perhaps what he was trying to do, even though he was kind of a government employee, to really kind of push back a little bit against a very black and white view of what World War II was doing. So two of these artists, Kuniyoshi and Kollwitz, were born outside the United States, one in Japan and one in Germany. And obviously that choice really kind of made a statement about maybe what it means to be an American, who's included in the putative we of the title of this work. And in another sense, I think there's also kind of a critical angle, maybe subtly being turned on the United States and the context at home, as opposed to saying, for example, that, you know, the problems are all in Europe, it's with the Nazi regime, it's with the Japanese. The images I think that Shahn chose to include here really kind of subtly suggest that there might be some difficulties in this country as well. So thinking about that central image, this dark-skinned figure with the word slavery, then you have this lacerated back to the right. So thinking about the long history of kind of anti-Black racism in the United States, of slavery and violence, even that suppression image, you could think about voter suppression. So I think there is kind of, within this broader propagandistic framework, there's actually this subtle undercurrent of something else that's quite different going on. I've talked a lot about that work, but I did think it was kind of important to highlight it, because I know that when Jonathan kind of opened this up to you guys, he did kind of put this in front of you as maybe a point of departure or a place to start. So I kind of wanted to start the conversation by asking each one of you in turn to talk a little bit about the poster that you created for this show, and how it give us a sense of kind of how it fits within your practice more generally. And I know, you know, political poster might be kind of a you know, it's not necessarily a total outlier for either of you. So I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about how you approach this commission. Kay, would you like to start?
Okay. Well, going way back, just briefly, my art always uses language as its image. And that began with my academic studies of language and linguistics. But then several years after grad school, this was in the 60s, late 60s, I segued into art because I realized that the things that was most interested me about language were things that had to be expressed visually, like, you know, with color, materials, scale, hand drawing and painting, graphic design. So anyway, I started making art. And when I did, the natural subject was language. And the way I approach it usually is in a very more passive way than an active way. In other words, I don't start out by saying like, I want to deliver this message. I just sort of let the language, text, whatever it is, speak to me. And I feel like my role is more as a more passive role, which involves just identifying in language, a phrase or in a word, a potential to deliver a message which sort of exceeds its normal role of communication. I hope that that's clear. Well, it will become clear, I guess. So that's sort of how I see myself in relation to the work. So when I was thinking about this project, I can't tell you how I started thinking about Harvey Milk, but I did. And then at some point I started thinking about removing the vowels and, just leaving the consonants. And I was thinking, I guess, about things that are missing when I'm going to get to that in a minute. And then when I did that, you read Harvey and then you read Milk, and then you realize you sort of do a double take, or I did, and realize that MLK is also, the initials of Martin Luther King. And it was just, as I mentioned to you yesterday, it was sort of a eureka moment, because you have these two like lions of civil rights in one name. And so it's sort of a sequential thing where the reader, reads Harvey and then Milk, and then does hopefully, does a double take. And it just seemed so appropriate, and just one of those, great moments for me, to have to be able to pair, these two incredible men in one piece. Their dates, by the way, almost overlap too. Harvey Milk died in 1978. Martin Luther King died in 1968, but they were born 1929, 1930. So that there's overlap there also. But as I thought more about it, I thought that of the missing letters, the missing vowels, and what that represents in terms of, the fact that they died so young, and what the world was missing without their continued efforts. And also of the people who in the civil rights, racially and gay rights, I mean, how many people are missing as a result of those struggles. So anyway, that's sort of how it occurred, a little background, and sort of the way I think about it now. I did make, of course, graphic choices, and I feel like that's one of my roles, besides identifying, the potential in a word or name or phrase, to manipulate it and present it in a way that the viewer, it's most effective for the viewer. So I did it in sort of a memorial format, white on black. And this is the same sort of thing. I was thinking about Brown versus the Board of Education. And, what you have, though, is just Brown v. And hopefully the viewer, I hope the work is open-ended enough, because it arises out of the language and not out of my intentional voice. So I'm hoping that the viewer sort of fills in the blanks. And in this case, I ended it after the V. I mean, so ostensibly it just says Brown v, but it lowered it on the wall so that one could fill in all the challenges. I mean, in this case, in the historical Supreme Court case, it was, versus the Board of Education, but how many other situations have come along after that and will continue to, that are a challenge. So it's always Brown, and I think it's, interesting that it does refer to color, and versus, whatever comes next. It's sort of incomplete. But that was a found one too. And this, the examples I chose were just to show, how the work exists. I consider language like found material, and that then the possibilities that are in it are sort of there. So this is called Leak. And to me, it was just sort of phenomenal that, when you put roof upside down over floor, except for the L, they line up exactly. And so you sort of have this textual prefab, that looks sort of like a little construction. And of course, it's called Leak because it's the L that's missing and creates the hole in roof. And I think we talked a little bit yesterday about how work fits into different situations throughout the years. And this was made in 1997, but I feel like applied today, we do have sort of a leaky roof in our culture, government, society. There's, it's not in the best shape. This is a drawing of acrylic wash on paper, and it's called Spring. And again, I'm hoping that, the viewer kind of fills in the blank. All they see is a sprig, which is like a little shoot. And this is 2020, this is recent. And so it's sort of a hopeful piece. And, I feel like it, it does express some hope, and, maybe someday it will be spring. Right now, it's just a little sprig. This is from 1990. It's a list. I'm not sure how well it can be read. It's called AIDS. It was on 50 bus posters in Chicago, tailgate posters. And it was part of an exhibition that Annie Philbin curated back then called Art Against AIDS on the Road. It was different transportation venues in 5 different cities. So what it is lists do make up a part of my print work. And I have about 25 or 30 of them. But anyway, it's a list of words that are synonymous with AIDS, meaning to help or assist. And that's what the list consists of in English, and I think there are some in French and Spanish also, like Socorro, and can't read it that well. But anyway, that's what that is. And all the ones I'm showing, I think, do have political undertones. Not all the work does ever, but I think it's something that's always with me. And so I believe that it ends up coming out in the work. And this is called She Man, and it's from actually 1996, but it's been redone as wall paintings and so forth up into the present. And I was just thinking, again, using just these 3 words that are just sort of found, how when you line them up this way, that the letters that make the pronouns feminine, the S and the R, kind of fall into the margins, and that the he's are central. And so I think it started out as a feminist piece, with that in mind. And I think with all the work that I start out with a certain idea of what I intend it to be or what I'm thinking about, but then hopefully others bring associations to the work, and I welcome and love other interpretations. This is a perfect example called Blurred. It is a perfect example of a found work that really made itself. And all I had to do was, set the type and apply the colors. I didn't do the wall painting, of course, but that within this word blurred, you have the color blue, you have red, and then the extra R was, I figured purple. It works well on perpendicular walls where the two sides, blue and red, sort of merge to form a blend. It was made in 2004 during the Bush-Kerry election, and that is really when blue and red states started. People started to talk about it that way. However, I must have absorbed it subconsciously, but I really never thought about it in terms of just politics. To me, it feels like two sides of anything, coming together. I don't know if that's possible today, but anyway, that was sort of how I thought of it. And another self-made word, removal, and this is called removal from office. And it's, it's just striking to me that and this was made in 2008 when Obama was elected and Bush was leaving office. And it was striking to me how if you just take the oval and, italicize it to set it slightly apart from the rest of the word, you can sort of combine, that thought. I mean, I think it helps to see the title, but maybe not. Maybe you don't need to. But anyway, it's, that you have oval within removal, and they form this one thought. It has been redone recently because, this current situation.
It would have been a missed opportunity otherwise, Kay. That really.
Yeah. And then this one, and the one that's going to follow, it's a series, it's a work called This Means War, That Global Warming. And again, just finding a word or discovering a word like warming where the M and the N, can sort of, the N, the left leg of the M is painted red, so that it sort of is M and N at the same time. So it toggles between warming and warning. And again, kind of a self-made word. And my aim was to have this in as many places as possible. It was first made in 2015 right before the UN Paris Summit on global warming. And it's been done in about, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 different places. This one was in Copenhagen, and the next one, this is in Edinburgh. And it's usually in the form of a banner, something that's fabricated. And there's been in a few other places, and I'm still open to, wherever I can do it. In fact, I just wrote to Richard Ingleby. This was his gallery in Edinburgh. And I noticed that the next climate conference is next November in Glasgow. And so I said, if you know of any venues in Glasgow, let's put it up there. So anyway, that's sort of an important and ongoing project for me. And that's it. Thank you for indulging me.
No, definitely. So Eric, I'm going to invite you to talk about your contribution as well, and to kind of look at some of your slides to kind of give that a little bit of context within your larger practice.
Yes. Again, thanks for having us today. This is a great exhibition to be a part of, and it's an honor to be here talking with Kay Rosen. This poster I developed, specifically for the project, and I'm constantly using caricature and a cast of characters in my art. And Lady Justice has become one of those cast of characters that I'm coming back to. And as you can see here, it's not a character that I developed. This is an old character from ancient Greek that personifies this idea of justice. And she's usually blindfolded with a sword and the scales of justice. And in this depiction, she is striking at this giant barrier, this giant wall that's created with the text that spell out law, L-E-W. And she's cracking at this barrier. Now, at first glance, and possibly by my name, you would assume that this is like the US-Mexico barrier that she's striking at when we're talking about all the different families that are coming from south of the border to the United States, looking for sanctuary, looking for hope, looking for a place of safety, and being denied because of the laws, right? So at first glance, you would think that this is a mother and a child coming to the United States. And I like that interpretation. I think that that is part of it. That is what I'm talking about these different laws that are unjust, and that justice is breaking through these unjust laws. So I'm not just talking about the US-Mexico border, but if you look carefully down at the right-hand corner, you'll see this character that I didn't develop. This is a character named Handala. And Handala is a famous caricature that was created by Naji al-Ali, which is one of the most famous Palestinian political cartoonists. So I placed Handala there in the hands of justice, also talking about what's happening in Palestine and the barriers and the unjust laws that are happening there. So I'm kind of situating this poster as in two places, as in the occupied former territories of Mexico that had been taken over by the United States, but also the Palestinian territories that have been taken over by Israel. So that's this poster. It kind of does two different things within the same idea of unjust laws. When we talk about separation of families or separation of land, and the inability to have freedom because some laws are not, or some laws are not just. Some laws are actually promote injustice. So that's what this poster, or how it came about. And then if we go to the next slide, we see that from very early on, well, I do have lots of different types of artwork. I use lots of different media. So I was trained early on as a teen as a muralist, and this is one of my most recent murals here in St. Paul, and it was created at a recycling center, and I have the Minnesota state bird and the state animal there recycling down the Mississippi, and the loon and the deer. So I like to have my politics out in the open there. And the idea that I learned when I was really young creating these murals, that art should be out in the public, in this public sphere. When I went to Mexico City for the first time, I saw the Mexican mural movement, and I understood very quickly that these artworks, these giant murals, they were not just for aesthetics sake. They were not just pretty paintings on the wall, but they had much more power in them. They were talking about science, they were talking about history, politics, all kinds of heavy issues. And that had a huge impact on my work. And I thought to myself that I wanted my artwork to have that sort of impact as well out into the public. So for the next slide, you'll see that I eventually went into printmaking. I eventually became a printmaker. The idea of use of a multiple. So instead of creating a one of a kind object that could be only seen at a certain place at a certain time by a certain amount of people, what if I created multiples, which enables me to have many amounts of the same image, but given to different places to be seen at different times by a bigger audience, to get that bigger message out into the world. And being here in Minneapolis, I thought it was it'd be an honor to do an homage to George Floyd, who had unfortunately was murdered by police here in Minneapolis. So I created this poster for him. Again, playing with the idea of justice. You know, instead of looking at justice as a Greco-Roman European type figure, what if justice was now changed into maybe a Black woman? What would that look like? So here I have justice as with her dark glasses, blind with a sword and the scales of justice, but also with a BLM, a Black Lives Matter armband, and there she is playing, blowing down the 3rd precinct, which was actually taken down by the uprising here in Minneapolis. The 3rd precinct being the precinct police department where the murderers were working for the police department. And then the old story of the three little pigs has now been, it's kind of like the catchphrase on this poster. The four little pigs, and they'll huff and they'll puff and will blow your house down. The next image is so eventually from going on that idea of having multiples and getting the ideas further and further out, I eventually became a political cartoonist. I've been doing political cartoons for over like 15 years now. And it's that same idea of creating multiples and getting more and more messages out. So now I'm utilizing the modern day technology instead of doing a hand printed poster, utilizing newspapers and social media to get the message out. And I create a one panel political cartoon strip every week called El Machete Illustrated. And I create these cartoons in various different topics of environment, social justice, world news, immigration, as the one that you've seen here, and also about what was the pandemic, which also overlaps. And Uncle Sam is one of my cast of characters that I constantly come back to, and constantly am criticizing of his misdeeds, as you can see, as he's deporting immigrants and with that exporting the pandemic with it into the different countries where they came. We go to the next slide. Some of these little cartoons eventually become other things. When I created this political cartoon back in 2011, I started thinking, well, what if this two-dimensional object was a three-dimensional object? What if this nest of guns or this nest of weapons was a nest that you can walk around or look within? And that's what I eventually did. And if you go to the next slide, at the DePaul Art Museum, 2 years ago, I had a solo show where I created this installation where I created that three-dimensional war nest, as I call it. And the war nest is a metaphor of our society that we live within. We live in this nest. We're incubated from very young eggs, if you will, to be surrounded by militarism, with all the different aspects of violence that swirl around us. How easily it is for us to buy guns. How militarized our police forces are. How militarized civilians are in our society, and not only in our society, but without from afar. If we look at all the different wars that we're involved in the past and present, we're constantly being bombarded with all the different aspects of militarism within the United States. And so it wasn't very hard for me to come into this project at the Jewish Museum, because I had already been creating propaganda for a long time. And a lot of people use that term with my art, because sometimes it can be very straightforward, it can be very blunt, and I don't have a problem with it. I think I like to call it counter propaganda, because I'm not the one in power. I'm not the one that has the established power to create these influential messages. I'm just trying to counter the messages through my own perspectives, and I'll leave it at that.
That's such a powerful place to leave it, actually, to think about that, the idea of something blunt versus maybe like we need a blunt tool to counter a blunt tool. Mm-hmm. I would be curious to hear both of you talk about that idea, and especially you, Kay, because you were actually talking about the need to have something that was maybe in excess of the communicative function of language, so that what you're doing in your work is, on the one hand, it can be polemical in the sense that it opens up a direction of thinking, or a kind of a aspect of meaning that maybe is latent but not acknowledged in the words as we're ordinarily using them, and that's kind of the turn of it. And yet, as you say, there's the thing that animates it, I think, is that something in excess, which seems counter propagandistic in that it eludes kind of a neat classification or a meaning. So I guess I'm and I think, Eric, that's present in your work as well, even though it sometimes deliberately does take on, maybe clarity is more of an impetus for you, or something that you're actively striving towards in crafting your images. So I guess I'd just be curious to hear you both talk a little bit more, perhaps, about that idea of propaganda, because those things seem to be at tension when we think about these things.
I think we're surrounded by propaganda. A lot of people think it's, that has to do with politics, but if you think about marketing is all propaganda. Coca-Cola is one of the best propagandists in the world, right? Everyone knows just the symbol of Coca-Cola and what that means. And it's a strategy. It's a strategy of getting ideas out into the world, and it could be used for good and bad. It could be used for capitalism. It could be used for activism. It just, I guess, it's depending who holds the ability to produce it. And for me, I think it's a strategy for me to fight back. It's a strategy. It's my way, if I'm thinking militarily, it's my tactic for striking back at a system that is broken, that has injustice going on, and I want to make clear what that injustice is. I want to show through my visuals the hypocrisy of what's going on through my propagandist messages.
I wish that sometimes I wish that the work were more hard, my work were more hard hitting. Are you done, Eric?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
I feel like, I guess coming to what I would definitely consider mine political messages. I don't know if it's, I would consider it propaganda. I would love it to be propaganda. I would love to also counter all the propaganda that's prevalent in our culture that Eric mentioned with my own. But I think because I come to it more from a linguist or language person's viewpoint, I just look at language as this sort of this field of letters, and the letters are sort of like body parts, and their sequencing, form these like small universes of text, and that and within those small universes, every little gesture, every change of letter, every space, every graphic strategy, everything sort of makes a difference, a great difference, because there are only 8 letters or something like that. And so it sort of speaks for itself. And in so doing, it doesn't have an intentional voice behind it like mine. I sort of let it do its own speaking. And I do think it is a more passive voice than the way I feel, because I feel much more aggressively about the issues than are portrayed, but that's just the way it works. And so I'm just hoping that, the viewers will kind of pick up the slack and enter in and bring in their own associations to, and build meaning and layers, from what they've seen. And some do, some don't. It takes an engaged viewer and someone who's really willing to read. And so, that's, I don't know if that quite addresses your question, Shira, but
it's funny. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's funny in listening to you describe that, just hearing those things about kind of inviting somebody to come closer in making these small interventions and kind of respecting the integrity of a word or phrase or text. There are like political metaphors in the way that the work operates, I think. So there's this kind of more obvious political dimension in a work like Harvey Milk, like the political poster that you made, certainly. or Brown versus, or removal from office even. And yet there's also kind of a strategy there that maybe has like some kind of political potential in it to kind of create that turn.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that, it's present in your work, and obviously it's present in Eric's work in a very different way.
Yeah.
It's in both cases, it's an address, right? It's an address to a viewer.
It's true. And I think maybe the use of, just pure text as opposed to text plus imagery, or imagery, although there is definitely a lot of text in Eric's work, accounts for that kind of emphasis, right? That I think images, I don't want to speak for you, but it seems like images, do have a certain kind of power. Text has a certain kind of power. But hopefully they both can address the same, the same problems.
Can I add, I think, Kay, that the timing and the placement or the situation where your art lives has lots of political meaning, depending on where and when.
Yeah.
Like removal, if that was placed during the Obama administration, it says something completely different versus when you would place it now.
Right. That is true. I think timing is important. Although some of those things could have been placed during the Obama administration, like warming, but this being warm. But I think you're right. And I think so. But yours too. The one, the cartoon about deportation, well, that certainly went on during the Obama administration. And but the timing is just so much more critical now. Everybody can see that and immediately agree. It's a consensus, I think. And if there isn't, well, that's kind of pathetic, but but I think there is. And I think it will be for a long time.
I found it really interesting that you both chose in the images that you selected to include a kind of multiple types of sites that the work exists in. So for example, I mean, Eric, you had that mural wall that you did, and I know, in addition, you were talking about comic books, and you're talking about digital kind of presentations of work. And I know you've also done kind of sculptural works, and you showed the installation that you did. And Kay, you had, on the one hand, works that were installed in a gallery. You had the poster, which kind of exists as a digital object, and then also as a print, obviously. And then, of course, you had that, something on the front of the bus. I can't remember the word you used for that cool space.
Oh, the tailgate posters on the bus.
Tailgate poster. That's such a good piece of vocabulary. But I'm curious how you think about that. When I thought about what thinking about Shahn and his project, I was conscious of the need to create an image or a visual object that was flexible. So, Eric, you were talking about reproducibility and the dissemination of images. And even that word of propaganda is about like pushing something out in the greatest profusion possible, and maybe making something that's as fungible or as flexible as possible. So I guess I was just curious to hear both of you talk a little bit about how you negotiate, and Eric, you were alluding to this already, but how you negotiate those different spaces and ways that your work can manifest.
Often, someone will propose, a venue or institution will propose something, and usually they have some insight also into the timeliness or the location of that work. And sometimes it's just my saying yes or no. but I do love that kind of just the ability to distribute things. In the AIDS piece, actually was done as a handout. And this was in like 1998 on World AIDS Day. It's December 1st, 1998. It was, during an exhibition at Survey Show at LA MoCA. and you know, and there's still so many of those around, these handouts, and I love the possibility of doing that. And you know, and it is a whole nother thing I do, which are prints. And I think it's just a great thing. And I just started, I'm not a tech person, but I wanted to, Eric, I wanted to ask you if your cartoons are on Instagram. I've just sort of started a thing on Instagram, and I've been posting works from throughout my career that, you know, I think are appropriate at certain times. And I find that that's a great distribution way. Of course, I'm coming to it a little late, but anyway, and I wanted to know if yours were accessible, if I could see them. You said you do them weekly, right?
Right. Yeah. So we'll friend each other.
Okay. I don't know what that is, but okay. I'll search for you. So anyway, Shira, so that's, I think that's great. I mean, public work always, you know, has the ability to also, you know, spread the word through its, you know, audience and in prints. And then of course there are the more private works.
Mm-hmm. Eric, I am curious to hear, do you want to talk more about your use of social media and how that fits into your practice or your project?
Sure. Well,
or respond directly to what Kay was saying, which might be richer. Yeah.
I'll get into the social media, but a little bit about the different use of different media, which ties into it. You know, all different media, I think they do different things, and they speak to different audiences. So when I do a mural, I like to talk to that specific community, because that's where that mural is going to live. That's where it's going to stay. You know, the mural can't leave the wall, you know, versus the print, you know, it can live in different spaces. It's very accessible. An installation in a gallery space, you know, that's where that audience is. That's where the art is going to live. And I want my art and the important political issues that I'm talking about to talk to all these different audiences. I want the mural to talk to the people in that neighborhood and tell them about the political situation that's going on. I want the art in the gallery to also talk to that audience. You know, I don't want these political situations and things that I'm dealing with just to be left to a certain population. I want these things to be broadcast, and eventually we go into social media, which is one of the biggest microphones there is right now. And I utilize Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all these different ways of getting my visuals and politics out into the world. The different media also, it says different things. I think, again, when I was showing you that small drawing of the two-dimensional nest, it says something different than an actual three-dimensional object that you can walk around. I think it has more of an impact, that three-dimensional object, because it's more real, it's more physical, that you can almost enter into it, versus this tiny little sketch that it's only an idea of something bigger. So I think, you know, that's why I like to use different media sometimes to get that point across, because it has a greater impact in the idea I'm trying to convey.
I think there is a worry about, I have it anyway, about preaching to the choir. Mm-hmm. And, you know, having your message directed only to those who already agree with you. So the bigger the audience, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I agree. And I think that's why it's important to have a lot of these public artworks out there, because you don't know who's going to walk by. You don't know who's going to look up and see that mural or see your banner on the wall. I think it, and especially now where, you know, social media can be filtered and you can be curated on what you're looking at. there's all these different algorithms that specifically cater to what you like.
Yeah.
Right? But a billboard, a mural, a wheat paste on the wall, you can't avoid it, right? It can be happenstance to come upon it, but you can't filter it from your feed.
Right. That's such a good point. Absolutely. It's like it's just like a great old analog.
It is a really interesting perspective, Eric, because I've been thinking so much, in looking at these works about the idea of virality or a meme and, something that can really easily be transposed and kind of zips from one context to another context, from one user to another user, kind of what kinds of images have that quality. And yet, as you say, in a virtual space, we are really encountering, essentially not necessarily the things we choose directly, but things that are chosen by an algorithm, as you said, that kind of reflects or builds on choices that we've already made about who we are, how we see ourselves, how we see the world. So that idea that actually it's just, it's literally a brick wall with some paint on it, and that is gonna, in some ways, reach people that, an incredibly, even a very effective meme can't.
Right. It's the great irony of our internet, that I can have a cartoon that could possibly reach someone in China, but depending on the way the social media works, it might never reach them.
Right.
Absolutely. I have a kind of a different line of inquiry. I don't want to shut this down, but I was curious, just one of the things that I observed, certainly in both of your posters and even in your work more broadly, but it actually seemed kind of core to what many of these commissioned works were doing. There's like a kind of cleverness or a wit, not necessarily to create something that's funny, but just it's like there's visual punning, there's, kind of these little witty incisions into reality that kind of aim to affect this turn of thought. And I guess I was just curious to hear both of you talk about maybe the idea of wit, if not of humor, and how you make use of that, or maybe how you see it operating in this political context more generally.
Should I go ahead? I was just going to say, I did really appreciate that question that you sent out. Humor is just so important to me. And I feel like the work has a whole range of it. There are some things that are just silly. I didn't show them here, but they're just silly. And then there are some things where the humor comes from sort of an aha moment, where I show something, you see something that in language that you hadn't seen before, but because of the way it's presented, that, maybe notice something new about it. And I've noticed that in my work, when a piece isn't working, it's usually because it's missing some kind of humor or wit or whatever. Which I don't know why that's important to me. It just is. And maybe it sort of balances the kind of more conceptual kind of rigor of the work. I don't know, but for some reason I just find it necessary, and I really appreciate it in all work. I mean, some of my favorite work is that does have that quality. And I sometimes feel like a stand-up comedian, and the punchline is often like, do I use the title as the punchline, or do I use the punchline as the title, or do I incorporate it into the piece? Anyway, there are all these decisions to be made, but it is really, I think, it's just important to me. I love humor. I love to laugh. I love people who make me laugh. And it doesn't have to be ha-ha. It just, it's just something that you hadn't thought of that's just sort of, I don't know, raises your spirits or something, or makes you smile.
That's super interesting. I would never thought you would have this problem versus the artwork versus the title on the of the artwork challenge each other. That's great. But humor is, yes, humor is an exceptional component within my artwork. I equate it to taking a little bit of honey with a bitter pill, because especially my political cartoons, because I'm talking about some terrible things sometimes, but I have to somehow make them digestible for public consumption, and and some of my cartoons are very bloody, but how do I depict them that you're able to intake them without vomiting? I have there has to be some kind of way to make it accessible without showing the real brutality or graphic harshness that they're actually getting at. So yes, humor is another tactic I use of trying to get these very despicable messages out into the world.
It makes me think of that, people describe violence as cartoonish, and when they do, the word cartoonish is almost, the sense you get is that the cartoonishness kind of mitigates the violence, it's like what you're doing, you're making these cartoons, which do, I think, really effectively use caricature and kind of visual humor, kind of making things that are grotesque, or that it is kind of a subtle humor that maybe, as you say, kind of sweetens the pill, but also in some cases I think can make the message even more trenchant.
But in this work, in your work, Eric, and maybe in mine, I feel like there has to be like a consensus by the people who are seeing it, of a knowledge of the events that we're describing. And if we did our work in a completely different culture, although maybe it would translate because, maybe things aren't so different elsewhere, but would there be the same cultural, references, and would they understand? I mean, I just wonder if that is built into our work. I'm not sure if it enters into the humor. Maybe it does, where everybody sort of is on, I don't know if they're on the same page, but they're part of this whole conversation. They're aware of the topics that we're talking about, and that's necessary for them to be informed about those things beforehand.
I often think about that, and I often think about how can my cartoons or my messages or my art be read by someone not from the United States. And I think in my political cartoons, I think text is important, but it is the minor part of the cartoon. I think the illustration does the heavy lifting, and the text is just like the cherry on the top to like emphasize something. So my goal is that the visual will tell the story. Now, the visual being a universal language, because everyone understands what they're seeing, there's always exceptions. That's my goal, that this visual language supersedes the text and can be read visually by someone not from the United States. And by using, again, I'm going to use this word again, there's another tactic of being specifically using icons or iconography that is easily read. I think Uncle Sam is a caricature that is easily.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
I think Lady Justice is a caricature that's easily understood. Lady Liberty, super iconic, right? So when I put those caricatures within my little dramas, theater of my cartoon, I think people from other countries can understand visually what's going on, even though they might not get like the detail of the text.
Right. Yeah. I think you're probably right. And now information traveling so far and wide and globally, you know, through all these platforms, I guess people are aware of all the little machinations of our culture. I worry about that too. People ask me about it, you know, how do people from other countries understand and, you know, grasp your work? And because they're all short words, anybody can look up in a dictionary, say blurred or warming, or I mean, it's not the translation that's the problem. You know, I think it's the cultural and political references maybe that I can sometimes worry about. But
there is, I think, something in common though, in that, you know, just in terms of thinking about the potential scope of the impact that the work can have or the reach that it can have. You know, you both, I think, are working with found materials. Kay, in your case, you know, language, obviously it's more than language, but you know, that's the kind of the bedrock the work is built on. And Eric, for you, as you say, you know, your maybe a core thing that you make use of is these found characters that are common, you know, if not to all of us and to so many of us. And it's not something that's like an obscure reference or something highbrow. These are everyday words. These are, you know, characters that kind of have a real cultural currency across many different places and kind of areas of culture. So I do think I hadn't thought about that before necessarily, but obviously there are limitations, and yet on a really fundamental level, you're both kind of grounding your work in these forms that maybe facilitate access in certain ways for a viewer.
yeah.
Well, I kind of wanted to bring the conversation back around to, you know, the year that we've all had, and thinking about this exhibition that was supposed to open back in March, obviously, and it opened in September, and so much has happened since then that I think we all feel like, you know, a decade or more has gone by. I'm curious, you know, as two political people, as two artists who kind of incorporate politics into your work in various ways, what kinds of, how do you feel coming out of this exhibition, coming out of this year, about what kind of potential art or artists have to have political impact, to affect social change? Because I do think that's a core question that's being asked in the show.
Eric?
Can you ask me that one more time? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think when faced with, you know, a year as difficult as this one, or with issues as urgent and terrible as, you know, for example, colonialism, as, you know, racism, thinking about all these things, topics that pop up in the show and in our, you know, in our lives. I'm curious to hear both of you reflect before, during, after. What do you feel like the role that you as artists particularly, or artists in general, have to play? You know, do you feel a sense of futility? Do you feel energized by what's going on? And I'm just curious to hear, yeah, kind of where you are with your political selves and your artistic selves in you know, December 2020.
Well, I'm a pessimist, so I don't really feel that much is going to progress. You know, it's great that the orange-headed idiot is out of the office, or, you know, almost out of the office, but I don't feel a great hopefulness that Biden's going to do anything radically different to change things that really need to be changed. Even before the orange-headed idiot took office, things were bad. You know, the immigration was you know, during the Obama administration, like Kay referenced, you know, they didn't call him the deporter in chief for nothing. We were still within wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The drone wars were out of control. The Patriot Act was signed again. There were still prisoners, political prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So there was lots of bad things happening prior to the orange-headed idiot. So right now that he's going to hopefully be leaving office, I'm not hopeful that drastic enough change is going to happen. And I think that the role of the artist, the political artist, is going to be definitely needed in the years to come. I don't think there's any doubt that our abilities and talents are going to be utilized in years to come. If we look at the great exhibition that you have on hand right now, the artwork that was made in the when were these Ben Shahn painting? And
it's 1942 for the Shahn.
1942. We're talking what, 80 years later, and we're still talking about the same damn topics of racism, colonialism, slavery. You know, it hasn't stopped, and unfortunately, the artist is going to be there to continue to create art to speak against these things.
Yeah, I feel sort of the same pessimism. I mean, nothing will be as bad as what we've gone through this last 4 years. And maybe Biden it will be like a kind of a recovery administration, you know, just to get us back to some point. But I don't see any great changes happening. As an artist, I think I've always felt frustrated that I sort of wasn't in the field actually doing things to improve people's lives directly or to make changes. And that's not what I do, and I probably wouldn't be very good at it. But anyway, it's always been a source of questioning and kind of a little bit of frustration for me. And I think that'll probably continue. I'm not sure. I think artists just have to keep doing what they're doing. And as far as looking for new possibilities or venues or platforms, I'm not sure how that will happen or what will happen, but I mean, it would be wonderful if artists could somehow, you know, promote the kind of change that Eric and I are talking about, or help promote it. We can't do that single-handedly, but you know, that would be a wonderful goal. If we could somehow, I don't know, be part of something that, you know, creates the kind of change that we're talking about. But maybe that's too idealistic.
I came across this really wonderful quotation actually by another one of the artists who did a poster for the show, which is Sue Ko. And it's something like, you know, the art can create these tiny thimbles full of truth, but those tiny specks are very dangerous to the oppressive classes, which is very Sue Ko. But, you know, I did feel like, yeah, there's really something in that, and that these kind of turns that can happen, or these, you know, these images that kind of take these familiar things and turn them in a different direction do have that power of this tiny speck of truth. So I guess I felt, you know, looking at that wall of posters and the diversity of voices that it represented in every kind of possible respect, you know, from the racial and ethnic identity of the artist to like the age and the issues that people were engaging with, I did feel hopeful. You know, just that bringing all of you together, kind of in this space that we have under Jonathan's direction, you know, as kind of the artist who's doing this work, I felt, you know, just the sense of togetherness, maybe, and maybe this is a very pandemic sentiment to have, but just the sense of seeing all of those images and then imagining kind of the human beings behind them gave me some kind of sense of energy coming out of this. So maybe I'm the optimist and you guys are the pessimist, but
it's also nice though that you're generating these conversations from those posters and that wonderful show. So maybe as things kind of generate, we can generate new things that will kind of spill out into the world. I don't know, but anyway, it's good you feel optimistic. I'm usually an optimistic person, Eric.
No, Shira, I think you're right. I think the show is a glimpse into the hope and gives some kind of bright glimpse into the dark future. Because dialogues like this is where the activism is, where the actual change happens. You know, I pray each night when I put out a political cartoon that I'm going to influence someone, right? But it's actual when I'm in dialogue with people talking about the political issues, talking about different situations, discussing, dissecting concepts, is where the true change happens. And this is right here, this is activism. So I commend you, Shira, for bringing this dialogue about.
Thank you so much to both of you for participating and for the work that you made for the show. It really means a lot to us to have been able to include you.
It was great to be a part of it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.